This is Victoria Ng.
And this is Arthur Tao.
We're here today on June 12th, 2013, in the conference room of the office of Ted Wu to interview Linda Wu for the Houston Asian American Archive Oral History Interview Project. So to begin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I was born here in Houston in 1947, and at the time I was born in the Memorial Hospital, which has now been, I don't even know the address, but it's no longer there. And my parents were in the grocery and the restaurant business, and I was the second child. I have an older sister, 4 years older, named Janita.
So you were born in Houston. Did you grow up in Houston your whole life?
Yes, I went to, actually, when I was born, I lived above my parents' grocery store. And when I was 4 years old, they bought land in Bel Air, Texas. So from the age of 4 through Bel Air High School, I lived in Houston, and then went to University of Texas in Austin. So I'm a real native Houston and Texan.
Where was your parents' grocery store?
It was on Jensen Drive. I'm not sure where, the address was either. I'd like to go back.
Did you ever help out in the grocery store?
Not in the grocery store, but I did definitely help out in the restaurant. My dad had, as a child, he had 2 dine-in restaurants, and one was a takeout restaurant. I think he was one of the first people to ever have Chinese takeout.
Do you have any particular fond memories of working in the restaurant?
They were very fond of when I was probably just 12 years old. I was working in one restaurant he called that was Poly-Asian, and it was kind of a multi-Asian. It was tropical, like Polynesian. It was Japanese. It was Chinese. And so we had a gift shop. He imported a lot of gift items, so it was a lot of fun. And then in those days, it wasn't open liquor. You had to be a member of a club and pay dues in order for liquor to be served. So a lot of the celebrities in Houston, not in Houston, but who would come to Houston would always be taken to my dad's restaurant because they were entertained very well. So I remember as a child getting to meet a lot of movie stars, so that was really fun.
Do you remember any particular ones?
Yeah, I met a lot of people from the rodeo, like Roy Rogers and Wyatt Earp. That was can't remember Hugh O'Brien was the actor. Elvis Presley came to my dad's restaurant. A lot. Bob Hope. A lot of them. I have some pictures I can show you.
Did your father pay you like a normal employee?
He didn't. No. It was sort of like expected, and I was happy to do it because, he never put us really on an allowance. But if I worked, then I'd say, Dad, I want to buy this or that, and he would just give us whatever we needed. So it wasn't like I had to watch the clock or anything, but we were expected to be there. And then the takeout restaurant, that was an experience too, because two families were working then more and more, and so people would come and would take family dinners home, and my job was to be the cashier and pack up the food. And then another restaurant, when I was a teenager, I worked in the kitchen, and I remember, all the parties back then for the Chinese kids, they worked in the grocery store and the parents' restaurant, so we didn't go out until like 10 o'clock at night or later, and I always felt bad sometimes because I felt like I smelled like, egg roll or something being in the kitchen and then going to parties. So that was, I had from soup to nuts, from glamour to being in the kitchen, so I had everything.
Did your sister work in the restaurant also?
Yes, we both did.
How much older is she?
4 years.
4 years, okay. When you went to Bel Air, sorry, I should probably know this, but was it segregated?
Actually, it was, the times were such that there were probably 5 Chinese at Bel Air when I was there. And for some reason, it wasn't really much in my memory. I think it was just starting where there were no really black families, in Bel Air. So we may have had 1 or 2, but it wasn't at all an issue.
What elementary and middle school did you attend?
Elementary school, I went to Condit and then Brayburn Elementary. In middle school, I went to Jane Long.
And were they all predominantly white?
Yes.
So the first neighborhood you lived in was
in on Jensen Drive.
Right. So what do you remember? You were very young. So
I was very young, and then actually, probably still as a toddler, we moved to like an apartment duplex in Montrose on Pacific Street, and I have memories of that place, but not basically my childhood. I grew up in Bel Air, rode my bike, played with the neighbors, stayed out all day.
What was the demographic of the neighborhood in Bel Air?
All white. In fact, my parents were not able to buy the lot where they built their house. They had a lot of friends, and one of their friends actually bought the lot in his name. He was a white, Caucasian friend. And then after he bought it, then he sold it to my father. Otherwise, we would not have been able to build.
Do you remember how much that house cost, or were you too young?
I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like $25,000. And that would have been, I was like 4, so I was probably 40. It was like 1951, something like that.
You said that when you worked in the restaurant, you didn't get to go out till late. Did that ever get in the way of social interactions with your friends?
No. Back in those days, I like I said, at Bel Air, there were so few Asians. Like Sharpstown, it was the first air-conditioned mall, and if I saw any other Asian in that shopping center, I knew who they were. So socially, it isn't like it is today. All of my social friends were kind of separate from my school friends. Like I did things, like I was in the Bel Air Bells. I was on the drill team. I was active in school clubs. I was on the student council. But once it came like socializing, we had the Chinese American Citizens Alliance Youth Club, and so all my parties were with my Chinese friends in the youth club. And so even though I lived in Bel Air, that was like far out. Most of the kids lived in the black neighborhoods where the grocery stores were, the mom and pop grocery stores. So we had a lot of parties at my house. My mother was really nice, and she liked having kids over. So being in the restaurant business, my dad would fix the food, and so everybody liked to come over just to eat. And we had like a big record collection, and we had the 045s, and so we had a lot of dance parties. So it really didn't, we had it like late. And as a kid, I would be out until 2 a.m. because one thing though is I had an older boy cousin, and so he would take me, and my mom felt he was responsible. He was 5 years older, so that helped a lot.
What were some of your favorite songs when you were in high school?
Well, I think in high school I have to like Everly Brothers, and who is it? Pa Anka, and all those like name songs, like it's Judy's Turn to Cry, and Johnny this or that. Dion, and was it Dion and Belmont? I have to look at the list, but it was all of those, the 60s. Everly Brothers, did I say them?
So you went to UT. How did you choose UT?
I actually wanted to go to UC Berkeley, but my mom said that that was too far away and I had to stay in Texas. So my mother went to Rice actually, but I wanted to go out of town. I wanted that college, dorm experience. And my sister, being 4 years older, she went to TCU, but most of her friends, or most of the older girls that she went around with, went to UT, and I just always wanted to go if I couldn't go to California.
Did you live on campus, off campus?
I lived at on Blanton dorm for the first, I think, 2 years, and then I lived on another. I lived in 2 different apartments, and the last apartment I lived in, it was called the Granada, and now that's where the LBJ library is. And one of the most famous people who lived in the apartments where I did was Farrah Fawcett. And so that was kind of, even back at UT, she was, kind of a celebrity because she did local commercials on TV.
From when to when were you at UT?
I graduated from Bel Air in '65, and I graduated in January of '69. I finished in 3.5 years, and that was motivated because my mother, she dropped out of Rice and never graduated because she met my father, and she quit. So she always said that no matter what we did, we had to finish college. So I was dating Ted, my husband, and he was a couple of years older than me, and so I wanted to hurry up, and I got married at 21, so that was...
So did you meet Ted in UT?
No, I met him in San Antonio, where he's from, and it was through the CACA Houston Lodge and the San Antonio Lodge. They would have a social anniversary, each city would, so we met at a social there.
Do you remember how much your tuition was?
Yes, it was $50 a semester, and you could take as many courses as you wanted. My mother, I remember I got a check for $1,000, and that lasted me the whole year, including tuition, including all my expenses.
How about the student body?
How much did how big was it, or
how big was it? What is the demographic?
I think it was about 35,000, and I remember the activity fee. I think it was like $35, and you could go to all the football games, and you could, I remember it included different entertainers that would come on campus, and I remember going to see Simon and Garfunkel. That was really exciting. One of them, and the Beach Boys came to campus.
Was the student body very diverse, or is it still also mostly white?
There were not that many. I really don't know. I can't remember, but I knew all the Chinese too, from Houston, and there were some, overseas Chinese from Hong Kong, I remember, and but can't give you any numbers. I wasn't very active in any social Chinese organizations on campus, if there were any.
At the time, were the Chinese students at UT mostly born in America or came from overseas?
I think most of them were from overseas. I really don't know. It could have been the same amount of people. I have no clue. Wasn't very aware of it.
You got a degree in fashion merchandising? So what did that entail?
Well, now they call it, I think, human ecology. But back then, it was home economics and textiles, clothing, and fashion design. And I always wanted to be a fashion buyer. My aunt, my mother's sister, is an artist, and she lived in New York City, and I had really no idea, what a buyer was. But I went to visit her, and she just thought, I would make a good buyer. I always growing up, my mother was born in San Antonio. She's 92 today, so she was American born, and my background's a little bit different, but she always, she put me in dancing school. She had piano lessons, and so I always liked costumes and things like that. So my goal was to be a buyer, and my first job, after college, was being a buyer. Well, going on the executive training program for Joske's San Antonio, and they're not in business anymore, but the Dillard store is who took it over. So that's what I did. I bought junior fashions, which are sort of like the teen sizes, trendy, fun clothes.
Did you ever work in college? Or did you not need to?
For $50 a semester. There weren't. I'm trying to remember. Did I have any jobs? No. If probably, no. Mm-mm.
Your job as a fashion buyer, did you have to do a lot of travel?
Yeah, it was really a great job. I would go to New York like every 6 weeks, California about 4 times a year. I traveled to Italy, Israel, and it was a fun experience for me because not only did I get to see fashion, but just the opportunity to meet other people from other sister stores around the country was a fun time.
Why Israel?
Leather. They had a very strong fashion house called Begador. I don't know if they're still in business or not, but they had really nice leathers, and that too was an experience. I can't remember exactly the times, probably in the late 70s, but security back then was even very tight. We had to go through being physically patted down, and you had to go and they would take your hair dryer and ballpoint pens, and everything was checked, and so that was interesting.
You got the job as a fashion buyer at 27? Is that right?
Probably younger. Let's see, 20. When I first started, when I first got married, we went to Hong Kong. Well, we went to the Philippines because Ted was in the Navy, and then we moved to Hong Kong, and then maybe a couple of years. So I would say maybe even 25, because I was only on the training program for 10 months, and I worked as an assistant for the junior fashion buyer, and she quit. She had 2 young kids, and so then I remember personnel brought me in and they said, well, we would like you to just take her job. And so I was really, kind of nervous about that. I didn't know what I was doing, but they said we would, keep you as, we'd call you an associate buyer, and you would have like 9 months and see how it works out. So, I was probably younger. I could look it up if you want me to, but roughly that age.
So,
what was your experience like in the Philippines?
In the Philippines, it was, again, it was really broadened my horizons. Back in those days, you have to kind of visualize. When I went to high school and college, we had to dress up. I mean, I think I even wore pantyhose to my classes, and we didn't wear slacks. We wore dresses. In those days too, when you got on an airplane, you dressed up. So when I got to the Philippines, my husband's station, it was called Sangley Point, and it was Cavite City, and everyone just wore rubber thongs. I mean, which is really common today, but back then I couldn't believe how people were, very poor. There were and Ted went first, and he didn't email me. He wrote me a letter, and he said, please don't be shocked when you see how it is over here. So there were, a lot of people that needed medical care, and it was just, third world. And so we actually, not that many officers in the Navy brought their wives, but we had only been married like 6 months. And so he and another officer who was just married also had his wife come. So we lived off base in a really nice apartment above our landlady. And so it was just a really cute, very nice house. We had air conditioning in our bedroom, but nowhere else. But what really made me also very sad is there was a young girl who asked us if she could be our house girl to work for us. And, I thought, well, I don't need a house girl. I've not ever had anyone work for me. But she said, that the officer's wife, family who lived there before we did, employed her. So if I didn't employ her, then she would be out, of having any money to support herself. So I said, sure, we'll do that. But there was nothing for her to do, and it just made me laugh. Like one day, I went, off base. I mean, not off base, but away to the base, came back, and she was ironing my pantyhose because there was really nothing for her to do. But, we just, that was the one of the things that I'll always remember.
Were there any operations during the time you were there for Ted?
Operations. He was a communications officer, and so he would fly from, the base in the Philippines to Vietnam, and he was,
During the war?
Yeah, during the Vietnam War.
And the whole time you stayed in the Philippines?
I did while he was based there. But then you have to remember too that wasn't the height of the war. It was winding down. In fact, he was separated from the Navy in the Philippines because normally what you would do is they would fly us back to the U.S. And so they were winding down. And so then Ted requested, since we were already there, and he had a sister living in Hong Kong. So from there, he just said, well, we'll be separated, released from the Navy here, and then we moved to Hong Kong. And then we lived there for a while.
Did you work in the Philippines?
No, I didn't work there. No, I basically just took classes, went to the officers' club, met whatever few officers' wives that were there, and went to Manila, did some sightseeing. I wasn't there that long. It was probably 6 months at the most.
What classes did you take?
It was like, I don't even remember, but it was on the campus. They weren't, things like towards a degree or anything. It was just whatever, like leisure learning kind of things. Could have been cooking. I don't remember. But
on the campus?
No, on the base.
Oh, on the base.
Yeah, on the military base there.
What year was that you were in the Philippines?
That would have been like 69.
And then you went to Hong Kong afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
How long did you stay in Hong Kong?
About a year.
What did you do there?
Okay. In Hong Kong, I did take Cantonese lessons because being born here, my mother was born in San Antonio, but her parents came from Canton, so she needed Toisan. And then when my sister learned Chinese first, but by the time I was born, I didn't speak because they spoke English. My sister was already going to school. So I took Cantonese, and then I also was, interested in fashion. So I had some contacts in Houston who wanted to see if I could find factories in Hong Kong to send back bell-bottom jeans. Do you remember bell-bottom jeans were real big then? So I was trying to make contacts, and it wasn't the easiest thing, but did a little bit of that, and then met other U.S. expatriates. Like there was an American club, and just, again, more social and enjoying myself.
Can you describe Hong Kong at the time?
At the time, we lived in this area. It was really interesting. I just read where we lived is the most expensive shopping space per square foot in the world. Are y'all familiar with Hong Kong?
Yeah.
Okay, Hasten Avenue, it's Happy Valley, and we were on Hasten Avenue, and there was a hotel called Lee Gardens, and there were a lot of automobile showrooms, and we lived in this mid-rise called Hasten Avenue.
West of the island, like the west part of the island.
I don't even know. It was Happy Valley. It's sort of.
Is it on the island?
Oh yeah, it's on Hong Kong Island, but I'm trying to Leighton Road. You know where Leighton Road is?
Not exactly sure.
Okay, well now I think they have all the designer couture, retail stores there. So I'd love to go back and see it. But at the time, if you want to know about prices, we actually were subleasing from a lady who was a designer, and she had a retail store, and her name, I can't remember. Her first name was Dorothy, and she subleased her apartment to us, and it was $125 US a month, and it had a balcony. I wish I had brought those pictures. It had a balcony, and it was just a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, kitchen, living room for $125 US. And now that I don't remember what the price per square foot is, but now, but it's been a long time, like over 40 years. So.
Were there a lot of foreigners living in Hong Kong?
Yeah, so like our next door neighbor was British. Have you heard of Run Run? Well, never mind. What was very interesting. I was going to say Run Run Shaw, the movie. It was like Warner Brothers, Shaw Brothers. Anyway, some people that lived around us were connected with that. There were a group of mainly from Europe, because at that time Hong Kong was a British colony, so a lot of people from Britain, and also we had mainly American friends.
Did you ever go off the island to Kowloon?
Oh yeah, we took the Star Ferry, and we would go to Kowloon, and my brother-in-law at the time was a architect, and so he did a lot of projects in Hong Kong. He did what I think it's still the Sheraton on the Kowloon side. He built that, Mayfu Village, which was like a community that Mobil Oil was involved with. We had a lot of relatives and friends that we were able to meet at the time.
Was it easy or difficult to get around using English in Hong Kong at the time?
Not so much. I mean, I was trying to learn Chinese, but it wasn't very successful, and so because it was an English colony, most people did speak English. That as far as business and getting around, and any place that had a lot of tourists would be able to communicate. But locally for me, like when I went to the market, I would have to try to use my Toisan, and sometimes that wasn't so good. And I know at that time like hairdos and things, I would go like to the beauty shop like once a week, and they also would say, and I didn't have enough Chinese to correct them, but they would say, "Oh, here comes the Japanese lady," because I couldn't speak, like them. But they, before too long, they would know I was not, a native of Hong Kong.
What did your husband do?
At that time, he was fresh out of the Navy. He had his bachelor's degree in business from SMU, and we met a developer from Hawaii named Chin Ho, and Chin Ho was a big developer, and he bought a lot of property in Makaha in Hawaii, and he wanted to build condominiums and market them to wealthy Chinese in Hong Kong, because I think 1997 was when Hong Kong reverted back to China. So he felt that if these wealthy people might want to, immigrate to the U.S. So Ted met Chin Ho and was hired to market his condominium. So he had a office in, I think it was Union House in Central District. But that was a whole funny story, because he's from San Antonio, and to be raised in Texas, we didn't even know what a condominium was. It was like totally a new thing. So he after a year, and I don't think he even kept the office open. So it was kind of like an adventure again. But we did, meet a lot of people and tried to market that idea. So we spent a lot of time just meeting people and trying to, do business selling condominiums.
So you helped him?
Well, everything there, I think, I didn't go to the office. Like, he had his own secretary and people there, but when it came, like invited to social events and things like that, I went with him.
And so when did you come back to the U.S.?
Probably in 71, something like that.
And you came straight back to Houston?
We went to San Antonio, and he went to law school at St. Mary's University, and then that's where I started working at Josky, San Antonio. And then I think we lived in San Antonio for about 3 years, because I think law school takes about 3 years. And I think he's going to be on the program to be interviewed, but when he was going to law school, he was also working for the Bexar County Attorney's Office. It's kind of all fuzzy to me.
How do you like San Antonio?
I loved it. I really like San Antonio.
Was it a lot different back then?
It was much more, the traffic wasn't what it was. It wasn't as developed. It just, to me, seemed, the natural beauty of San Antonio was a little bit hillier, and, I don't know if it has zoning, but, there weren't as many, like, strip centers. It just had more charm to me than Houston.
Is there a location that left you a particular impression?
Well, we lived with his mom, and his mom lives near Trinity University, and so it was an older section, and it just reminds me, just more green at the time, maybe. I don't know.
Have you gone back?
I was just there about 2 or 3 weeks ago to visit a friend. But we don't really, and my sister-in-law still lives there, so we do have family.
Did it change over time?
San Antonio, when we go, we just go to see the people. And when my kids were little, we did go in Fiesta, Texas, and SeaWorld and all of those things. But I really haven't, seen it. But I know the traffic's not so good, and I know there are a lot of restaurants in like the Pearl Brewery. They have a really nice development of restaurants, and in San Antonio, it's such a does so much with tourism in the Alamo that it is, they do a nice job. But when I worked at Joske's in San Antonio, that was right next door to the Alamo, and so that was kind of a fun place, to work too.
So when you came back to Houston, that was after you finished the law degree,
Correct.
and you worked in the Joske's here?
Correct.
Was that the Galleria one?
Yes, yeah. They were really nice because when I guess I was a buyer for maybe 3 years in San Antonio, so I knew all the Houston merchandisers, and so my sales were very good. And I think it was timing. I don't think I had a magic touch or anything, but I had really good numbers. So when Ted got a job in Houston, the people in Houston, they moved their junior buyer so that I could take her job. So it just worked out really well. They, welcomed me. I just got a job transfer.
Did you get a lot of Chinese or Asian customers?
No, no. As a matter of fact, I guess it was sort of maybe, again, I have to put things in perspective. Growing up, fashion, I think, became a thing, and it was that whole Beatles thing, and there was Carnaby look. There was like Mary Quant, and fashion was a way of expressing yourself. Things became different, and so after I worked at Joske's, or actually when I was still in San Antonio, I had a girlfriend who was working at Joske's in Austin, and she wasn't my friend yet, but we met, and then there was another, and she became a buyer and actually worked for me in Houston. And then there was another Chinese girl that went to UT, and she's about 2 years younger than me, and she became a buyer as well. So at one time there were 3 Chinese buyers at Joske's, so that was unusual. I mean, not so much, our customers were part of whatever the demographics of Houston was at the time, but whatever we bought was just mainstream. Like, one of my biggest vendors was like Levi jeans, and a lot of the people that I bought from are now no longer in business, but it was interesting.
And how long did you work with Joske's?
I stopped working for them in probably 81, something like that. Yeah, about 81.
Do you remember your salaries?
I was thinking that I should go check any stubs. I think when I would quit, it was in the 30,000 range plus bonus. It was like around 37 plus bonus.
Was the bonus based on how well your sales were?
Mm-hmm. And it was based on not sales but profit. And so, you always hear about inventory, so, and then markdown, so it's your gross margin, your profit margin.
Why did you quit?
Because I had, at that time, a 2-year-old, and I had a lady who, helped me, and then she wasn't able to help me anymore. And with traveling, I just felt like, okay, it's time. And then I was also kind of interested in real estate, so I got my broker's license. So then I started, getting into real estate.
What neighborhood did you live in at this time?
Where I am now, actually. Well, the first house that we bought in Houston was in Bel Air, and then I grew up in Bel Air, and then we bought a house in Bel Air to be close to my mother. And then in 1980, we bought a house, what is now the West Chase area. It's near Memorial in Kirkwood, so West Houston.
What was the demographic like?
Where? Or when?
81.
In my neighborhood?
Yes.
Well, basically just white and a few minorities. I don't think I know I had one black. You want to know, like, ethnically? I had one in our subdivision. There was one black family, and maybe a couple of other Asian families. And I'm not talking any more than like 150 houses. Not that big of a neighborhood.
So the demographic did change from when you grew up to when you moved back. Like, not drastically, but it changed.
Yeah, but this is in West Houston. In Bel Air, when we were there, I don't remember any black families, but there could be. I just don't remember, because of that. When we lived in Bel Air, Ted and I were both working. We were married for like 10 years before we had kids, and so I was basically just a career person. I didn't, just drive to and from work and didn't really know my neighbors.
You said you have a 2-year-old in 81. What, is that your only child?
That was my only child until 83, and then I had another one. A girl. I have a girl and a boy.
What are they doing now?
My son lives in Los Angeles, and he is he's a director of global marketing for Mattel. And my daughter is a doctor of physical therapy in Chicago and works at the Rehab Institute of Chicago.
Did they attend school in Texas like you did?
They went to Kincaid for, actually, my daughter they started out both in public, and then the village school in Kincaid for my daughter, and then my son just went to Kincaid from lower, middle, and high school. And then he went to Brown, and my daughter went to Northwestern.
What are their names?
What are their names? My son is Ted Albert Wu, or Theodore Albert Wu. He's named after Ted is actually junior, so we named our son after their grandparents, my dad and Ted's dad. And then my daughter is Kristen, Kristen Wu. Kristen Gale, Gale, which is my middle name too.
You spent the first 10 years of your marriage, you said, working. And did you ever face discrimination working at Joske's, even though, because you mentioned that you were a minority? No, I never felt discrimination as an adult. As a child, when I went to Condit, I remember feeling, discriminated. I was sheltered, I guess, and so I remember going to, in kindergarten, we stayed in our own little classroom, but when first grade is when you go into the big lunchroom, and I remember things like, kids, like pointing at me and saying, "Oh, you're Chinese," and it wasn't malicious, but it made me feel different, and and then later on, like lower school, just boys being mean boys, I remember, but because I don't think today there's probably different discrimination, but it was more like just being different, not knowing exactly, what to think about me. But in the workplace, I never felt like it was a negative. And you actually, going back, when you said you were in Hong Kong, the natives assumed that you were Japanese because you couldn't speak Cantonese. Was there any negative repercussions to that, or they just knew that you couldn't communicate as well? You know what's interesting? Okay, I never felt, I think Hong Kong is very class-oriented, and I felt like because I was an American coming back,
that, yeah, I didn't feel comfortable like being around some of, the Hong Kong,
Natives.
right, the wealthy people in Hong Kong. I felt a little less comfortable around because, it's kind of the same thing here when, I know they don't mean to be, I don't want to use the word rude, but you always want to be like, if you feel more comfortable expressing yourself in your first language. And so, if you don't understand it, well then, people have to always say, oh, well, what they said was blah, blah, blah. And it's so, that would come into play. So that would be uncomfortable. Because I didn't want people to have to take the time to, explain to me what everybody else was, listening to, or the discussion. So that always is a problem.
You said you speak Toisan.
Mm-hmm.
Who did you learn it from?
Okay, I would listen to my parents when I was younger, but they usually spoke Chinese to each other if they didn't want my my sister and I didn't know what they were talking about. But when I had my son and I was working, my family had a very good friend who had a relative who came from Hong Kong and needed to stay with somebody. So I thought, great, that way my child would learn Cantonese, and that would be very helpful. So this lady spoke Cantonese to my son, and I picked up some Cantonese, but it was mixed with Toisan. So, but that came later. My learning Toisan came like 79 forward, except for what I picked up as a kid.
Did you only speak it at home, or did you ever use it working at your father's restaurant?
No, because my dad's clientele were not Chinese. It was mainly, Caucasian. So when people came to the restaurant, I spoke English. It was so different because back then there weren't enough Chinese even to be, like wait staff or anything. My dad's, in fact, I might have some pictures of his wait staff that were basically, either Caucasian, Hispanic, or I don't know if we had black waiters. No, probably not.
Does your son speak?
He picked it up, but she didn't stay with us so long. But part of it always when you're young, I think it comes back, and he wished he could speak now because for Mattel, like he goes to China, visits factories in China, so it would be very helpful if he could do that.
After Joske's, you went into real estate.
Correct.
How were you introduced to that?
Again, my mother was a real estate broker, and so I got my broker's license as well. So it was, just part of connections with my mom.
And how long did you do that for?
I kept my license for quite a while. I can't remember. Probably to the mid-90s.
And you're currently retired now.
Right.
So you're very involved in the community here. Could you tell us about some of the things that you do or have done?
It's interesting because a lot of the things I'm involved in now are because of, my parents. The main one is Chinese American Citizens Alliance, and I started out as a member of their youth club. And when we moved back from San Antonio to Houston, that was a few years later. CACA used to be a fraternal lodge. There were no women members. There were only women in the auxiliary, which was its separate organization. So after coming back to Houston, then the men and the women joined together. And so I was always involved in one of the main reasons is the Miss Chinatown Houston pageant. and that was started like informally, probably in the late '60s, and then in the '70s it became, more of an event of its own and not part of this picnic that we used to have. So been involved with the Miss Chinatown Houston pageant for probably 30 years. Another organization is the Houston Taipei Sister City organization, and I've been on the board of that for quite some time. And my mother was, again, a charter member and helped make that happen. I love the arts as well, and I'm on the board of Dance of Asian America, and I'm vice president of that, and that is, bringing the arts of China to Houston, and they put on 2 shows a year at Miller Theater, and I am involved in another organization that's not Asian oriented, but it's called the Women's Fund for Health Education and Research, and I feel like women do so much for everybody else, and sometimes they don't take care of themselves, so I got involved with that. My sister had open heart surgery, and that was about the time I got involved with that organization. And let's see, what am I can't remember what else I have put down there, but that a new organization that I'm really very happy to be on the board of is the Chinese Community Center. And they do so much, not only for the Chinese community, but the community in general. So that I enjoy spending time there.
For the Taipei Society, so you don't have any relation to Taiwan? So
no, but what that organization began before China was recognized, officially as, by the United Nations, and so Taiwan was always, a great friend to the United States, and there was a long history there, and so the Houston Taipei Society, I think they've been sister cities for 51 years, and so that was the natural allegiance. And a lot of the old Chinese here in Houston, they helped Taiwan, by donating a lot of money when, they were, our friends for a long time. It's a historical thing. So although, I don't have any relatives or Taiwanese or Chinese relatives living in Taiwan, that association was more of a friendship for the freedom of the U.S.
What do you think about the mainland Taiwan relationship today?
It's interesting because I think now it's the green. I don't know that much about the politics, and I know it's very tenuous, but it seemed like in Houston anyway, there was not a big, mixing between the people from Taiwan and, China, but now, a lot of them are very, it's not like 2 separate groups, and I think a lot of it is the economics. So, really don't have a strong opinion about that.
Have you been to Taiwan?
I have, but it's been years ago. I went for the first time with Houston Taipei Society when I was 16, and I don't know, I think I may have been back one other time, but maybe not. I think that is the last time I went. So.
What was the experience like?
It was interesting. We stayed at a hotel that it was modern, but it was not up to like a U.S. hotel at the time. And I remember this is just silly, just my impression. I remember going into the bathroom, and then I couldn't get out because the doorknob didn't work. And so here I was, stuck in the bathroom, and I was just like, a teenager, and I was like, let me out of here, let me out. And anyway, to me it was, again, just a lot of bicycle traffic and a lot of noise, and it was interesting. I know it's changed a lot, but what I remember also, how many people had perfect English in Taiwan. We met a lot of people from Taipei, on the city council and the mayor, and I was very impressed with them.
How about the mainland? Have you ever been there?
Only to the new territories, back when we lived there. And I made one other trip, but no, both of my kids have been to China, to Beijing, Shanghai, and had trips, but I haven't been. It's on my bucket list.
Are you planning to visit where your grandparents are from?
That I would like to do. One of my friends put out a survey. I think she's been interviewed, Rogine G. Calvert, and I'm a member of the G Family Association, and she put out a survey a couple of years ago, and we were thinking about going in 2014, but I haven't heard haven't heard an update on that, but definitely want to go to the G Family Village and do that.
Your two children, what are some particular Chinese traditions that you raised them with, or did you raise them with? Chinese traditions?
I really was not raised with Chinese traditions. My mother being born in San Antonio, we never even celebrated Chinese New Year's. She was really very Americanized. And so we started observing Chinese New Year's, I think, more from an educational standpoint, because it was, celebrated actually at their schools, and, for people, the cultural awareness. And so, we always just did the Chinese Lacey, and, that's about it.
Why did you choose to send your kids to the Kincaid School?
I went to, all through public school in Houston, and my husband went to private school in San Antonio. And so, I think he took more of the lead with their education in that regard. But when my son was, when he went to a school called, actually I forgot one of his schools. He went to school at Grace Presbyterian in second grade, and his teacher told me, every mother's dream hearing this, he said, "Oh, your son is so exceptional and bright, and I really think you ought to consider sending him to a St. John's or a Kincaid." And so I said, "Oh, really?" And so anyway, so for third grade, he applied at Kincaid. We didn't do St. John's, and also the Vanguard program. And so he got into Vanguard, but he didn't get into Kincaid. So then the next year, I think we applied again to Kincaid, and so he got accepted, and he didn't want to go. He said, "I don't want to go there. I'll be moving to 3 schools in 3 years." And so I said, "Well, just try it. You might like it." So he did, and it was like he just really, really liked it, and the kids were all very welcoming, and he had a great experience, and it was good for him. And then with my daughter, she also went to, public school, and then Village is very close to where I live, and so we just had her go through lower school, Village, and then she transferred at middle school to Kincaid, because at that time I don't think Village had a middle school.
What was the tuition at the time?
Why did?
Oh, tuition.
Tuition.
Oh, tuition. I don't remember what it was, in the lower grades, but when my daughter graduated from Kincaid in 2002, I think it was like 11,000 for upper school, something like that.
Per year?
So, I want to say, well, I hate to do this, but maybe like in the lower school, maybe 2,500 or maybe 3,000, 5,000. I don't know. I could go look. I save everything. I mean, if it's important, I could look if you want.
While you worked as a real estate broker, what parts of town did you sell?
I did, mainly the Southwest, like Bel Air, close in, like just Southwest. That's pretty much it.
What was your client group?
My client group were people that I knew, just within the community. I didn't, I did work at, it was called McGirt at the time, and then it became Prudential Texas. And so we all had like office duty where we would answer the phones and, pick up just walk-in type of people. But for the most part, it was just through my community.
Was it a full-time job?
Well, with real estate, it can be more flexible. You can kind of make your own hours, but a lot of it, and especially in residential, you do a lot of it on the weekends. And so, I, also probably, as my kids got older, that time became important, so didn't do as much of it then.
What is your political affiliation?
I am, when it comes down to it, I really vote for the person, but I am more like a moderate Republican.
And why is that?
Because I believe in smaller government. I feel like, people, times have really, changed. I've seen a lot change, and I feel like, people expect more from the government and not so much, and I think that enables people. I think we need to help people too. I'm not saying that there are definitely legitimate reasons, but I think sometimes when government gets too big, it's hard to oversee, and therefore, people have a tendency, not to spend wisely.
Would you say that you're a politically active person?
No, that's not my, strong suit. No.
How about your family?
My family? In terms of like, not really. I like to support people if I feel like they would, be a good leader and, in their position. Like, example is, I mentioned Regine G. Calvert is running for city council. And I think Regine is a Democrat, but, I know Regine, and I think she'd do an excellent job. And, actually city council, it's not like they don't have, parties, if you're a Democrat or Republican. But, I really support her. So I'm really more for the person, and rather than, straight line. I don't ever go and vote straight line Republican. But in general, my philosophy is I'm not for big government.
All the Asian community organizations that you are involved in, do you see a lot of political activity among those organizations?
Well, like this CACA, Chinese American Citizens Alliance, we're, for, the Chinese, and protecting our civil rights. And sometimes that does involve politics, to make sure that our voices are heard. And, I feel very strongly about that. I mean, I don't follow anything just because I am Chinese, but I think, it is, definitely an area that I want to make sure that whatever is fair and, in other words, I don't want to be a silent person, but I'm not, I'm kind of a reluctant leader. I'm not a person that really enjoys, going out there. I'm not a person that I feel that can do a lot in terms of getting people roused up and following my lead.
You were president of the CACA.
Yes. Well, I've been so. I felt like it was a responsibility to do. I felt my dad was this, CACA Houston Lodge president. He was the Grand Lodge president of the national organization. My mother was the first woman president, and I've been, very involved, and I felt like it was almost my duty to do, and, I wanted to support the mission, and that's the reason.
Is there any particular project maybe that happened during your time as president?
Well, when I was president, we had a national convention here. There's every other year the CACA has a biannual convention, and so we had it here in Houston. So we had like 16 different lodges come during the end of July in 2011, and so that was one of the major things. And then another thing is we were active in trying to get support from the both houses on the national level to do a resolution to regret, an expression of regret for the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which covered a span in history that where they would not allow Chinese to immigrate. So we had, we contacted all of the congressmen from Texas, and it passed first in the House and then the Senate. So that was a really good thing.
You've been in Houston your whole life, and you even mentioned when you first grew up, it was predominantly white, and now Houston is considered the most diverse city in the country. What are ways that you've seen this change happen?
Just being observing the makeup of any activity you go to, it's really interesting. Growing up, all of my friends were Caucasian. I didn't really have any, like black friends until I really started working, because when I was at UT, I don't remember any black students at UT. I think that, just the immigration of all groups, and it's not just Asians, but you can go anywhere and you hear people speak German or Swedish. Like you said, it's totally different. And I think back then, I would say, 80% was Caucasian, and Hispanics. We did have Mexican people and the black people, but Asians. What do you know? What the population is now in Houston? The percentage
For Asian people?
Yeah.
The greater Houston area is something like 7%.
Oh, really? Okay. I couldn't tell you, but it was like when I was at UT, when I would walk on campus, there, and I would literally, it would annoy me, but if there were like young college Chinese boys, not from the U.S. but overseas, they would literally stop and stare at me. They would quit walking and just stare at me, and I didn't know what to do because they didn't say anything. They would just look at me. So it was just, I think they were just surprised to see another Asian, A and B, probably female. I don't think there were that many students at the university level that were coming over at that time that were female. So it's definitely changed.
Do you see this change as a good thing?
Oh, definitely. One thing, another change that's funny to me is because when I grew up, every Chinese was ABC, or pretty much my age group. They were born here, and their parents had the grocery stores and the restaurants. And so I remember about 3 years ago, I was involved with the CACA Youth Club, and there was a teenager, and he said, "Oh, your English is so good." And I said, "Yeah, I was born here." And he said, "Oh, well, I'm so surprised because someone as old as you, they usually speak with an accent." And I was kind of like, thanks a lot, but because with, all of the immigration now, I guess I'm a minority, my age group, have been born here. There aren't that many.
How do you cope with that?
Oh, it doesn't bother me. I mean, I don't know. I'm not offended. I just find it humorous. I know some people probably would, but it doesn't bother me. I thought it was funny. I mean, I'd never given it a second thought until he said that. From someone not, I don't know. I guess I'd have to ask other people, am I one of the oldest people that speak Texan?
Do you think you are more Chinese or more American?
I would say I'm more American.
For all the community involvement that you have done among the Chinese people, some people may think that you are too American to be representing the Chinese population here. What would you say to that?
It's interesting. I, because I don't speak, particularly Mandarin, which I think is the more common language here. I was just at a big banquet for the ambassador from Taiwan on Monday night at Ocean Palace, and so he went to the University of Texas as a student. This is Ambassador King, but most of the program was in Mandarin. But then they had someone who would speak English, and then all the speakers that spoke Mandarin also spoke in English. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off track here. But I'm a member of the Houston Taipei Society, and they were looking for some people to chair. There is a Friendship Pagoda in Herman Park, and it's our mission now. We're trying to either move it because the Houston Conservancy wants to move the pavilion, or get a new pavilion. And so there's a lot of work being done by the Houston Taipei Society. And so another board member said, I would like to nominate Linda Wu because she is a bridge between the Houston community and, you know, the Taiwan community or Taipei. And so, you know, I feel that being here for so long, and, you know, not me, but the pioneers that my parents were, that, you know, I don't feel like, if people question that, that's fine, you know.
A big part of, I think you said this was under the CACA, you worked with the Miss Chinatown pageant.
Right.
What do you think that means for Houston? It's very long running, and even our 2012 winner won the USA
Correct.
level competition.
Again, it's a tradition, and I think that it's amazing. For me, people have asked me, well, why do you? Some of the girls, like, why do you do it? It's volunteer work. But I'm just amazed. It's been a gift to me to see young women who are, you know, doing so many things. I don't like to call it a beauty pageant. To me, it's a scholarship pageant, and they are able to excel in many areas. You know, it's talent, it's intelligence, it's, you know, what are your career goals? And, you know, very often the people that have been in the pageant, you know, they have become, you know, they're attorneys, they're medical doctors, they're go into politics, and it's just something that you can only do for a short time in your life, you know, maybe when you're still in school or just getting out and working, and it's a way they can network, and it is relevant, and it seems like more and more girls want to do it. And I think with education being more expensive, and, you know, we try to get our scholarships higher, and the fundraisers are so loyal, not the fundraisers, the people that donate, they always come back year after year. We very seldom, I mean, with the economy downturn in the last few years, some people have dropped out, but, you know, more, you know, still do it no matter what, and they just enjoy coming and supporting it. So it's not difficult. It's not something that we're trying to hold together. It's just, it is, you know, I think a good thing.
Do you have any more questions before maybe we can move on to some of the things you brought?
What do you do in your free time?
Well, I'm not that organized, I would say. You know, I was president of the CACA, and I just stepped down in January, but I'm still very involved, so that we meet once a month and there's so many things going on in Houston, so I keep active in that, and just being on the boards of different things, there's always something to do. You know, I am, we have, you know, free time, and my husband likes to fish, and we have a place in Galveston. We try to go as often as we want, and I have 2 cats and a dog, and so I'm, you know, just busy. I can't, you know, I don't have any regimen, but there's always something going on. Right now I'm gearing up for this weekend. It's our first meeting for the Miss Chinatown pageant, and the girls are coming, and we're doing a little workshop seminar. So on August the 3rd, they'll be all ready to compete and present their best foot forward. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Who is the most memorable contestant?
There's so many, I can't say. I mean, you know, we've had, you know, outstanding ones, you know, most recently Steffi Hugh, and she was amazing, because when she was, you know, she can be, you know, waiting for, you know, whatever group activities going on, and you know, she was being pulled in so many directions for 2 years, because the first year was Miss Houston, and then she won the national title, so everybody wanted Steffi as the Miss Chinatown USA, and so, you know, community things like fashion shows and all that, and while she's waiting for, trying on whatever, she would be with her books and studying and missing 2 weeks of school to participate in California. I know she was working hard and keeping up her grades and being a presidential scholar. And so and that's just one person. I mean, they all juggle. One of our former Miss China Jones is getting her MBA in Houston at U of H now, but she's working for Tesoro in San Antonio and commuting back and forth. And she's offered to help us with this year's pageant. And she's active in the YLC. Are you familiar with that? They do it at Rice every summer, the Youth Leadership Council, I believe. And, we have other girls that, they're going to prestigious schools like Rice and Harvard and, Northwestern, and just they're very, they're the doers and the leaders of tomorrow. And I was really excited. One of your Rice alums, I'm not a Facebook friend. I probably waste too much time on Facebook, but she's a friend of one of my former contestant friends, and she just got married, and she did the pageant when she was between Rice and going to medical school. And I just saw her, she got married a couple of weeks ago, so I was really excited because doing the pageant, was something out of her comfort zone, nothing that she would ever think of doing, but she did it, and I think you grow from everything. I don't know. Didn't want to really name names, but since Steffi.
I know you worked in junior fashion, but I'm curious, because you're a fashion buyer, who are some of your favorite designers now?
One that who's Asian, and her name is Con Nguyen out of Dallas, and her fashions are the tailoring is beautiful. I think it was about 3 years ago, and she did a show for the Asian Chamber, I believe, and I just noticed how beautiful they were. And so she's an up-and-coming designer, and I know she sells to Neiman Marcus. Other than that, I'm not, I don't really follow it anymore. I just kind of, don't. I think right now there's a lot of just different trends going on. It's a lot different too.
Yeah. Could we go see what you've brought for us?
Okay, sure.
Do you mind if we record while you talk about it, or would you like us to turn it off?
Why don't we turn it off, and then if you want to know about a certain thing, I can tell you, because there's
the question again. In the restaurants growing up, did patrons use chopsticks?
No, everyone was served with forks and knives, but they would be asked if they wanted chopsticks, just kind of a novelty, because very few people knew how to use them.